Busy Saturday, but I made time to bring you the 5 most underrated athletes of all time. Enjoy. My number 5 is Frank Robinson. Rookie of the Year, 2-time MVP, 1 in each league. 14-time All-Star. He was in the top 10 MVP votings for 10 seasons. Finished his career with 2,943 hits, 586 home runs, and won the 1966 Triple Crown. Played from 1956 to 1976. And I think that's very important because what Frank Robinson did in the era that he did it, none of us will ever truly understand. The man performed and put up numbers under real racism, like all major league players and everybody just in society back then. To be able to perform at that level or really any level living under those conditions, hats off. So my number 5, Frank Robinson, most underrated player of all time. My number 4 most underrated player of all time, and it pains me to say this, is Terrell Owens. When you're second in yards, 8th in receptions, and 3rd all-time in touchdowns, and you can't get into the Hall of Fame, you're underrated. There's a problem. That's first ballot numbers, everybody, and it's a crime that he's not in. Take out all the celebrations and the smack talking and that's my quarterback, man. Take all that out of it. The numbers don't lie. First ballot. It's a crime he's not in. If he wins a Super Bowl with the Eagles, basically on a broken leg, his story might be a little different. His narrative might be a little different. And let's take this, for example. If you had a guy in baseball that was, let's say, 2nd in home runs, 3rd in RBIs, and 8th all-time in batting average, this wouldn't even be a discussion. He'd be a first ballot Hall of Famer. Terrell Owens, my 4th most underrated player of all time. Number 3 on my list, Moses Malone. Moses Malone, 13-time All-Star, 8 All-NBA teams, 3-time league MVP. He was in the top 10 in rebounds 14 times, top 10 in blocks 3 times, and was in the top 10 MVP voting 10 times. Moses Malone was a big dominant center. The reason he makes my list, because he dominated in the 70s, 80s, part of the 90s, and he would have dominated today, regardless of the era. And when people talk about the NBA all-time greats, nobody really likes to mention Moses Malone that often. Moses Malone, number 3 all-time, most underrated players. Number 2 on my all-time list is Otto Graham. I put Otto Graham on here instead of Jim Thorpe because I think everybody knows who Jim Thorpe is. But Otto Graham was a quarterback for the Cleveland Browns back in the 40s. 3-time league MVP, 7-time champion. When we talk about the greats of all time, we don't really talk about Otto Graham. He played with the Browns when they were a very well-run organization, so you know it was a long time ago. He led the league in yards per game almost every year, and that was 200 yards on average per game. I put Otto Graham on the list because I think people need to know about him. He's a 7-time champion, 3-time MVP, but he also played quarterback back in the day when you could throw receivers to the ground and kill the quarterback. There was no late hit penalties. You could clothesline quarterbacks and basically rip their helmets off. Otto Graham, 2nd most underrated player of all time. As the sun starts to set, my number 1 underrated player of all time, Stan Musial. His greatness is grossly underrated when we talk about the greats of all time. I don't think people realize it. His accomplishments, so many, I had to actually write them down because I couldn't remember them all. So let's just go through them. 24-time All-Star, 3-time MVP, 7-time batting champion, led the league in hits 6 times. 3 of those years, 1943, 220 hits, 1946, 228 hits, 1948, 230 hits. He finished his career with a .331 batting average, 3,630 hits, 475 home runs. He missed the entire 1945 season because of the war. Now, if you think that's insignificant, let's just take a look of how that kind of actually hurt his numbers a lot, because he went to the war in 1945. He was discharged March 15th, 1946. That season, he won the MVP, batting .365 with 228 hits. The year before that, 1944, he batted .347 with 197 hits. So he missed a year of his prime. Came back, was discharged in March, won the MVP. Basically, coming back from the war, no spring training, winning MVP. That is a baller. That's a gamer. Stan Musial, my number 1 most underrated player of all time. Well, I didn't get much of my stuff done, all of it. The yard's still a mess, but I feel like I should be on this list as underrated. Nick Krantz, one of the most underrated people of all time. See ya. Let me know what you think.